The dissenting opinion asserts that the 14th Amendment is a part of the Constitution of the United States. While this same assertion has been made by the United States Supreme Court, that court has never held that the amendment was legally adopted. I cannot believe that any court in full possession of its faculties could honestly hold that the amendment was properly approved and adopted. And that's a Utah court case. And so the so-called 14th Amendment, it's a fraud. The so-called 14th Amendment citizen is a corporation as used in this chapter. This is 28 U.S.C. Section 3002. United States is a federal corporation, and any agency, department, commission, board are all entities of this corporation. A U.S. corporate citizen does not have access to the first 8 amendments against the powers of the federal government. The U.S. corporate citizen does not have the right to trial by jury, does not have the right to keep and bear arms, does not have the right to face your accuser, does not have a right to give evidence against state citizens, does not have a right to common law indictment. They use information only. How many times do they do shit with that information? They have mandatory military service, mandatory taxes, may vote, but it doesn't mean anything because there's no political power. And if they do something because of the vote, it's because they feel like doing it. It's not about race. The U.S. versus Amistad is a good example. There was some slaves. The Amistad was a slave vessel, and it had a load of cargo of slaves, and what happened is the slaves overpowered their captors and killed them all except for one, and they said, take us back to Africa, and because they didn't know how to navigate, they didn't know how to sail a ship, and the guy that was that they didn't kill sailed in circles off the coast of Virginia until the U.S. Navy found him, and they brought him back and put him on trial for murder. And so what happened is it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Look it up. That's the Supreme Court citation right there. And what happened is the court finally ruled. Actually, the arguments in the case were either A, if they're slaves, they're property, and therefore they're no different than a dog or a cat, and a dog or a cat can't commit murder. And if they're not slaves, then they're free men, and they had every right to do what they did. And the U.S. Supreme Court said they had every right to do what they did, and they sent them back to Africa. And so again, so it's nothing to do with race. That has absolutely nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with slavery, and they're using this. It's all coming from the bankster thieves and their Jesuit Vatican handlers, and it's all about divide and conquer. And so we cannot allow ourselves to get diverted away from the real issues. When people start talking about race and stuff like that, it has absolutely nothing to do with race, and it has everything to do with slavery. And this is actually a quote from Albert Pike, who was a Confederate general and became, after the Civil War, became a head of the Masons. Okay, and the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agent terror of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. During the Second World War, the international communism must be strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until a time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantages of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and the political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We must unleash the nihilist and the atheist. We shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. And it goes on, it says, then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from the moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in public view. This manifestation will result in the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. And so that's what it's all about. It's about Satanism and Luciferian Vatican. That's where it's coming from. And Albert Pike is talking all about it right there. You can be a national without being a citizen. Citizenship is part of the political community. The U.S. passport application even talks about a national, and it says I'm a citizen or non-citizen national. The application form in the instructions talks about non-citizen nationals. It is, however, true that in all common law countries it has always and consistently been held that the wife and minor children take the nationality of the husband and father. That is common law doctrine. In doing this, I shall have occasion, incidentally, to evince how true it is that states and governments were made for man, and at the same time how true it is how his creatures and servants at first deceived, next vilified, and at last oppressed their master and maker. Let a state be considered as subordinate to the people, and everything else be subordinate to the state. And is that ever going on today, or what? Every citizen and freeman is endowed with certain rights and privileges to enjoy which no written law or statute is required. I don't need some statute. These are the fundamental or natural rights recognized among all free peoples. As a general rule, men have a natural right to do anything which their inclination may suggest, if it be not evil in itself and in no way impairs the rights of others. The law of nature, being coeval with mankind and dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other, is binding over all the globe and all countries and at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this, and such of them as are valid derive all their force and all their authority immediately from this original. And that's Black's Commentaries on the Laws of England, Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. The acts of the legislature, apparently contrary to natural rights and justice, are in our law and must be in the nature of things considered as void. The laws of nature are the laws of God, whose authority can be superseded by no power on earth. A legislature must not obstruct our obedience to him, from whose punishments they cannot protect us. All human constitutions which contradict God's laws, we are in conscience bound to obey. Bound to disobey. And again, it comes down to the same stuff, okay? If a judge is dealing with a statute, he's not a judge anymore. He's a clerk. And so that has nothing to do with we the people. The individual, unlike the corporation, cannot be taxed for the mere privilege of existing. The corporation is an artificial entity which owes its existence to and charter powers to the state, but individuals' rights to life and own property are natural rights for the enjoyment of which an excise cannot be imposed. And this is as old as time itself. This is taken from Acts. And when they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto them, tell me, art thou a Roman? He answered, yea. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, but I was freeborn. Then straightly they departed from him, which should have examined him, and the chief captain was also afraid, after they knew that he was a Roman, because they had bound him. Okay, and so this is as old as time itself. How can you lose your sovereignty? In order for a member of the sovereignty to become subject to regulation in any way, they must agree to it. There's got to be a contract. As with any contract, it must be knowing, willing, and intentional. But individuals, when acting as representatives of a collective group, cannot be said to be exercising their personal rights and duties, nor be entitled to their purely personal privileges. Rather, they assume the rights and duties and privileges of the artificial entity or association which they are agents or officers, and they are bound by its obligations. Okay, so that's why they need to fabricate evidence of this corporation. Everything is by consent. This is taken from Section 14 of the Criminal Code of Canada. No person is entitled to consent to have death inflicted upon him. Well, think about it. When they put that in there, everything else is by consent. The rights of individuals are restricted only to the extent that they've been voluntarily surrendered by citizenship to the agencies of government. The state citizen is immune from any and all government attacks and procedure absent contract. Every man is independent of all laws except those prescribed by nature. He's not bound by any institutions formed by his fellow men without his consent. They don't have authority to do that stuff. They don't. That's why a statute means nothing. The rights of individuals are restricted only to the extent that they've been voluntarily surrendered by the citizenship to the agencies of government. This is a letter sent by Arizona Senator Wayne Stump, and in 1985. We're going to get in closer here. This is showing it closer, and it was sent to Ralph Melstred, Director of Public Safety. It's come to my attention that numerous individuals in our state have rescinded all their contracts with the federal government, state of Arizona, and each of its political subdivisions, establishing themselves as freemen under the organic national constitution of the Republic of the United States of America. Consequently, they may be driving without auto registration, driver's license, and any other evidence of contract. Because many law enforcement personnel may be unaware of the contractual nature of auto registration and driver's licenses, it is conceivable that this situation may lead to confrontation between these individual and law enforcement personnel. I urge you to inform yourself and your personnel about this matter as soon as possible. If you would like to be briefed by someone knowledgeable on this subject, please contact me. In the meantime, inasmuch as this procedure is entirely appropriate when properly carried out, I would like to be personally notified of every such instance of confrontation. So, again, this is how you do it. You rescind the contracts. It's all a fraud. State citizenship is a vested substantial property right, and the state has no power to divest or impair those rights. So how can you lose your sovereignty? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Anytime you get anything from the government, it's an implied contract and brings you into their jurisdiction. Anytime you register for anything or make application for anything from the government, you're giving them a power of attorney to make legal determinations for you and represent you. You're making them competent in your affairs. You're telling them you're a person. You're converting yourself into a slave. All statutes are written very carefully, and most do not apply to members of the sovereignty. 99% of the time, the government is technically correct. It is not up to the government to tell you that you're a member of the sovereignty. If you have to go to the bureaucrat and say, what does this statute mean? You're basically saying that you are incompetent, okay? And there is no such thing as an incompetent sovereign. The government lawyers make up a statute that properly applies to those entities they have jurisdiction over. The burden is on us to assert our sovereignty. If a member of the sovereignty gets unknowingly involved in something that operates as a contract by which he loses his sovereignty, he's made a mistake of law and fact. There's lots of case law on that. So whose duty is it to protect the Constitution? The courts have ruled that the government is not the protector of the Constitution. If the government is not the protector of the Constitution, then who is? It's not the function of our government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It's the function of the citizen to keep the government from falling into error. That's U.S. Supreme Court. And that's 100% correct. It's up to us. We need to take care of business. The reason we're getting a tyrannical government is because we're asleep at the wheel. How can you lose your sovereignty? It's the people who are supposed to be, it is the people who are supposed to be protecting the Constitution. How do we, the people, protect the Constitution? Well, we protect the Constitution by challenging what the government does through the courts administratively and for refusing to participate. It is one of the fundamental maxims of the common law that ignorance of the law excuses no one. The burden is on the sovereigns to know and understand the law and assert their sovereignty. All contracts must be entered into knowingly, willingly, and intentionally. None of the contracts entered into with the government by which you might lose your sovereignty are willing, intentional, or knowing, and actually all you have to do is bring up the issue, and they don't want to talk about it. Matter of fact, they will never talk about it, because then if they admit that such a thing is going on, they're involved in treason. That's exactly what's going on. The sovereignty of the people is unalienable and imprescriptible. In order to regain your sovereignty, you must assert it. And when you assert your sovereignty in the way that we're going to talk about in asserting your sovereignty, you build a case with evidence that you can use in court at a future date that you should you need to do so. You send all documents by registered mail with the return receipt impossible, because registered mail is kept under lock and key and there's a chain of custody. Government attorneys may turn it over to a bureaucrat who may also respond to a point. Does it matter? Do you know who you are? If the government were to admit that you're right, they'd be admitting to treason, extortion, genocide, and other felonies. The government's attorneys will probably not respond at all. That's the smart thing to do, quite frankly. In order to be a true sovereign, you must be self-reliant. You must not only talk the talk, you must walk the walk. You must be knowledgeable about the law and how it works. You must be prepared to take the initiative in court if necessary. You must make it known and know in certain terms that you're all of the above. It's all about slavery. Has nothing to do with race. A U.S. citizen or a citizen of Canada or a citizen of Australia is a slave. Either you're the king or you're a slave, and there's nothing in between. If you participate in their color of law statutes, then you've agreed to be their slave. It is only involuntary servitude that's not lawful. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. Nobody said it'd be easy, but it is possible. If tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy, and ain't that the truth? The business of the journalists is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it, and what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are jumping jacks. They pull the strings, and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, our lives are all property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. And that's John Swinton, former Chief of Staff, New York Times. We can educate ourselves. What can we do? We can educate ourselves so we know when our rights are being violated. We can work with our friends and neighbors to reestablish our common law juries and our common law de jure courts. We can educate our public servants because many of them do not know any more than we do. We can educate other people by circulating this video in any other way possible. We can work with our friends and neighbors to get the United Nations out of America and Canada and anywhere that wants to be free. The United Nations is owned and operated by the bankster thieves and their Vatican handlers. We can educate ourselves about what a common law jury is and what the law of the land is. We can demand a common law jury of our peers. Judgment Day is coming for these United Nations bankster thieves, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing some of them do that little dance they do at the end of a common law rope. There are common law courts springing up all over, and these thieves are going to be brought to some real justice, and am I ever looking forward to it? I am glad it's not up to me. We never take the law into our own hands because that makes us worse than they are. There are upcoming events: Color of Law, Fire the United Nations Judicial Whore in Texas, City of Fort Worth Pigs, City of Grand Prairie Pigs, How to Do a Habeas Corpus, Asserting Sovereignty, Fire the United Nations Judicial Whores in America. Copies of these documents can be found at my private group at Yahoo. I have got YouTube videos. If you're watching this, then you'll see my YouTube profile. I've got over 150 videos uploaded, and you can also contact me at that email address. So what's the alternative? That's the alternative. It's live free or die. And that's all there is to it. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my little rant today. I hope you got something out of it. And please circulate it around.